Shalom and welcome to another edition of our Daily Bread. I'm Messianic Torah. This week's Parashat is the 8th Parashat of the book of Bereshit, also called Genesis, and it's called Vayishlach, which means and sent. And this week's Parashat starts in Genesis or Bereshit 32:4 through 36:43 with the half Torah in Hosea or Hosea 11:7 through 12:12. My message for 2014-15 is called Spirit versus Flesh. And this week's Parashat, this is the summary message, by the way. For the full 1 hour message, you can click the link below attached to this video. For my 2014-15 message, we start with the signs of the Spirit. And basically what I cover in this situation is we're getting to Yaakov sending out this servant to tell Esau he's returning. So when we look at what this really means, when we see the comparison between Yaakov and Esau, as I talked about in the previous message in Vayetze, we see that Esau was a man of the field, an outward man, and Yaakov was a man that dwelled in tents. So he was an inside man. And so this comparison is going to be, in this model, is going to be the spiritual, the inside versus the outside, the earthly, the flesh. And so the spirit and the flesh. And then we're going to see some things. So then when we compare this whole message, a parashat, that we see this battle and this struggle between Yaakov and Esau all the way through their lives. And we see this as a spirit versus a flesh parable. And so we see the signs of the Spirit, which is that what does it mean when Yaakov sends a servant out to Esau? When the Spirit sends a servant with a message to give an indicator of what's coming to the flesh. And the flesh in this instance also can mean the world. So what we see is we see things that this is a great message for people who are coming into Torah, and everybody who's come to Torah has this time when they were first telling their family and friends and their co-workers saw that there was a change. These are those signs of that Spirit. It's like that servant going out from Yaakov to Esau. And what people see is they see that there's now judgment, there's now discernment, and there's a separation. No longer will you eat the same foods, no longer will you look at food the same way. You're discerning the difference of foods, or you're applying judgment, and you're separating what's clean and unclean. You're separating the Sabbath from the work days. You're doing all these different things. And this is what the world sees. So that's like that servant coming to Esau, telling him that Yaakov, that spiritual man, is coming. Next we see the battle between the spirit and the flesh. This is a word and deed situation where we see oftentimes that we have Yaakov afraid, and he's going to divide himself into two bands. And all these are patterns that we see. So Esau knows that his brother's coming. He was angry. They were at battle. There's this constant battle between the flesh and the spirit. That's the model of this story, but it's the model of our lives. That we're constantly battling between what we choose, what we do, and what's within us, what our spirit is, and applying our judgment versus the judgment of God. Next we talk about the strong spirit overcomes the strong flesh. So Yaakov prays to YHWH, and he's a spiritual man. Now Esau comes and he's a physical, earthly man, and he has all of these 400 men with him. And we see that the one who is strong in spirit, Yaakov, ends up winning over the one that's strong in the flesh. And the Beatitudes kind of illustrate this as well, this pattern. Next we see wrestling with the angel. So we see that the Spirit prevails over all. Now the spiritual man represented by Yaakov in this situation, now he's actually now going with a fleshly man, Yaakov, wrestling with a spiritual being, we believe, in the angel, and some think maybe it's Messiah, or there's a lot of different conjecture around it. But the interesting point is that his name is changed from Yaakov to Yisrael. And Yisrael means, it says, because he prevails with God and man. And so what we get is this little pattern that if you're spiritual, that you will prevail with God, that God will accept you, and that then ultimately you will prevail over the flesh, even those ones that come against you. And so compared to the fleshly man, who won't prevail with God, as modeled by Esau, and also won't prevail even among man. So it really just teaches us this pattern. Next, we see this concept of the spirit preserved and protecting the remnant, because Yaakov divides up his camp and he goes before them, but he wants to make sure that even no matter what happens to him, that his future is protected. And this is the way of thinking of a spiritual man. When we study the Torah, we're protecting our future. When we teach it to our children, as Avraham did, we're protecting our future. No matter what happens to us, we want to preserve that Torah and keep it going strong. Next, we get into the hug. They hug it out, and this is this model, the second model of the spirit and the flesh coming together. Because when Yaakov started, he put on the clothes, he put on the outside of Esau, but inside, right, he had Yaakov, and this is why he received the blessing, because Esau himself, a man of the field, wasn't going to get the real blessing. And now we see them come back together and they're hugging. So this big moment of judgment comes in, and instead of it being death, again, Yaakov prevails with man, with his brother Esau. And so we see this combining, this embracing of the flesh and the spirit. And that's really what it takes to get to that sense of completeness, is that you want to have the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And as Mashiach said, when the inside of the, clean the inside of the cup that the outside may be clean. So when your spirit is right, then you can do right deeds on the outward. So we see these things coming together, the return of the spirit and the flesh. And that, of course, foreshadows Mashiach, who represents the spirit and the flesh in those moments. So next we get to traveling alone. So he sends Esau out to go. He sends him out from him. This is the model of circumcision. You have the spiritual man, the inner man, and then you have the fleshly man that is then on top of him. And when Esau being removed then from Yaakov, originally put him on and got the blessing. Now he takes him off and sends him forth, just like the foreskins removed, and to reveal the inner man. And this is the model of circumcision and the model of this period in time where they're going forward. And so he's went through his time of trouble. He's going. This model shows us a model of the holy days, actually, when he sends out his servant to tell Esau, to give him a message or even a warning potentially that he's going to come to them. Is like Yom Teruah. What we see the wheat harvest here, and that takes us to the parable of the wheat and tares as well. And there's a whole bunch of things that are connected here, but what we see is like Yom Teruah, like the blowing of the shofar, right? That's like this servant being sent to Esau. Then we have the time in between then and before he comes before Esau, where he's afraid and he's repenting and he's asking for help and he's getting his house in order. This is that time between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, the days of awe. And then when he comes and meets his brother, he literally says it's as if he met YHWH face to face and lived. So this is like Yom Kippur, this is the day of judgment. And then after that, in the Parashat, he goes to Sukkot and builds a house. So we see the model of Sukkot. So it gives us a little hint that this is a model of the holy days, and then it plays it right out there. Next we get into Shechem's desire, which is the rape of Israel. Now, Dinah means justice, and a lot of people look at this. Here, Shechem, it says, was more honorable than all of his household, and he goes and rapes Dinah, which is justice. And so a lot of people see that this is like an outsider or a pagan coming to rape Israel. But really, if you look at justice and judgment as the Torah, then it's actually those people who are joined to the Torah. It's the religious people who say they're following God, but are actually defiling it and then want to hold on to it, even though they took it by force and they defiled it. And I see this a lot as the pattern of religion. They take hold of the Word of God, the truth, and yet they defile it. And then they want to hold on to it, and they want to, keep it and prance around and say, hey, we're the children of God, while the whole time they aren't. As it says, be as we are, right, when it says to circumcise them. But if you're like the Torah, if you're not like the Torah, right, you can't be joined to it. And you're just trying to take something from it for your own desires. Next we get this concept of putting away the idols, and the idols represent those earthly things that aren't spiritual. And then we have Rachel, who dies giving birth. And this shows us the pattern of Ephraim. So I hope this was a blessing. If you want more information on the full message, plug in, hit the link for the full message. Until next time, I'm going to say Shalom.